Hi, Founder fans. Jason here. Today's founder is Henry Brockholst Livingston of the Livingston family. Now, Henry Brockholst happened to be the son of William Livingston, a person who voted for independence, though had to run home before signing the Declaration because he wanted to be governor of New York for 20 years, during which time he wrote the Constitution. And that's just one member of the Livingston family. So Henry Brockholst grew up in this extraordinarily wealthy family, and he went to Princeton, where he was actually a graduating classmate of future President James Madison. Now, Livingston graduated and, though still a teenager, immediately went to join the Continental Army. And he actually became an aide-de-camp to General Philip Schuyler, who at the time was the third ranking major general in the Continental Army, during which time he participated in the Northern campaign of the war. Now, Schuyler ran into some hard times at one point and was recalled and replaced with Horatio Gates. And it was at this time that Henry Brockholst Livingston went over and became an aide-de-camp to Benedict Arnold, who was about to become a hero at Saratoga. Now, this is really the turning point, bringing one of Schuyler's old guys in Livingston under Arnold, that turned Gates against Arnold and established their feud that led to other things. We're not getting into that, though. Henry Brockholst Livingston served in the Saratoga campaign valiantly during that victory, after which he does resign, ostensibly to focus on his studies, but shortly thereafter he's recruited by his brother-in-law, John Jay, to join Jay and his sister Sarah Livingston Jay in their trip to Spain, because John Jay was now the minister to Spain and was supposed to try and get their help. And Brockholst Livingston goes and spends 2 years in Spain on this diplomatic mission as John Jay's secretary. Now, Livingston ends up leaving. Spain doesn't play along. It's kind of a fruitless effort, unfortunately, for the people there. Henry Brockholst Livingston ends up coming back to the United States and is captured just off the coast of America. He's captured by the British and is brought to a prison. Fortunately for him, this is in 1782, well after the Battle of Yorktown, and while negotiations are pretty far underway to resolve the whole having a war thing. So Henry Brockholst Livingston is actually released after just 3 weeks in prison. And he goes on to finish his studies and become a lawyer in New York City. Now, he ends up working a lot of cases and really making a name for himself. One of these is the Weeks case. Now, in the Broadway play Hamilton, you hear them reference the first murder trial in our new nation. Now, I assure you, there were plenty of murder trials during colonial times, but the murder trial they're talking about is the trial of Levi Weeks, allegedly having killed his fiancée. Now, Weeks was got off. Famously, his defense team was Hamilton and Burr. Not so famously, the third person was Henry Brockholst Livingston, who was a major part of getting Levi Weeks off from not being convicted in that case. And it's about 2 years after this that he's made a name for himself to the point where he is appointed to the New York State Supreme Court. And it's during this time that there is a trial called Pearson v. Post. And this has long-standing repercussions throughout United States history when it comes to property law. Basically, this guy Post was hunting and he was chasing a fox. And then this other guy, Pearson, saw the fox running and killed it and went and took the pelt. And then Post ran up and said, "What are you doing? That's my fox." And Post actually sued Pearson in this case, saying, "I was giving chase to the animal. It was rightfully mine to kill. I should get the pelt." Now, the Supreme Court rules in favor of Pearson, basically saying finders keepers. This guy killed the animal and took its pelt. It's his. Livingston, on that New York Supreme Court decision, wrote a very interesting dissent, which argued two main points. First of all, the chase was on, so if Pierce didn't intervene, we could have assumed that Post would have made the kill, and since he was putting out the effort, he should be rewarded for it. Furthermore, he did something a little strange. He asked, what did hunters think? And in essence, he's referencing common law. Most hunters, due to sportsmanship, would have assumed that no, Post should have that fox. And essentially what Livingston was saying is common law should dictate that no, that the man who was hunting the fox should get the fox. Unfortunately for him, fortunately for Pearson, that's not how the court decided. And that's generally how America's looked at hunting and property law from there on out. Whoever finally made the catch is rewarded with the specimen. Now, despite being on the losing end of that case, Henry Brockholst Livingston made quite a name for himself. That, in addition to being a Livingston, he is selected in 1806 by President Thomas Jefferson to be a Democratic Republican on the Supreme Court. Now, what's interesting is at the time, the two people leading the Supreme Court were John Marshall, Chief Justice John Marshall, who was very famous, and Associate Justice Bushrod Washington, a nephew of George Washington, who was the only other member of the Washington family to hold a significant federal position. And these two men were Federalists, and they were appointed as Federalists. Now, the Federalist Party was already dying out by this point, and Bushrod and Marshall would be Federalists for a very long time. Really the only holdouts for a very long time. And the thinking was, if we appoint Livingston, he will be a Democratic Republican. We can balance out the Supreme Court. Let me know if that sounds familiar to how things work today. The idea was to balance out the Supreme Court. Unfortunately for Jefferson and Livingston's old classmate Madison, who was the next president, Henry Brockholst ends up siding with Marshall and Washington on most decisions. Now, this is pretty much because, well, they were trying to go by the Constitution and not by what their party wanted. Unfortunately, Jefferson and Madison underestimated that in Henry Brockholst Livingston. But he does spend the remainder of his life on the bench, the next 15, 16 years or so, on the bench, making decisions that affected the early republic and therefore still affects us today. So Henry Brockholst Livingston, just as a person on the Supreme Court at that point in time, his efforts did have arguably a more profound effect on our everyday lives right now than most other American founders, despite him being a name you probably have never heard before, but now you have. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely hit like. That's the best thing in the world you can do. And if you're new here, you can subscribe because I put out videos like this 7 days a week. Thank you, and I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.